myself that I'm not going to worry about technology, okay? So if this craps out, we're okay, because you're going to have everything you need right in front of you. And you can start whenever you're ready if you haven't already. And I also just brought pens. Pens are always nice to have. If you want colorful pens to mark things, I have them up here. They're a little thick. And then I will give you the document. The Holy Cow people are a little on the absurd side in their protection of data, okay? And so some of you may have already felt a little frustrated because it's like this big secret. You know, everyone filled out the survey, and they ask us to not share it with you until it's time, right? And what I want to encourage you to do now is to not open the booklet right away, which is something that I would want to do, okay? So I want to sympathize with you if you're wanting to look at the answers, as it were, right off the bat. But just sit tight with that. If you read this or open it too soon, you can miss some of the nuances of what we're talking about, and also you can miss what your neighbor might be asking or saying. I also want to let everyone know that this is being recorded, and the reason for that is that you don't want to just make copies of this and distribute it. What you want to do, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is to have an executive summary that people can have. You can put that on your website, distribute it widely, and then for those small percentage of persons who want the full Monty, you can have them look at this packet alongside the video of our interpretation today. So that's why we're taping it. And so that'll be that. Alrighty. And then if you look on the first page, on the inside of the Vital Signs report, it has the little apology for why we don't distribute the report in advance. You don't have to read that or care about it, but that's just the rationale for why you're just now seeing this packet. And then turn to the page right after that, and I don't know if everyone has a pen. Does everyone have a pen or is in close proximity of a pen?
Can I get one?
Yeah. I'm just gonna distribute these. And we're gonna take just a moment to have you work on this notions page. This is just to get us started on some of our pre-existing assumptions and beliefs about surveys in general, and also about church in general, and St. Andrews. And so these are true-false questions, and then what I want help with is, at the end of our time today, I want to review the answers with you, and I just need help with a reminder of that. I will do my best to remember to track back to this, but go ahead and look through some of these statements and assess for yourself whether they are true or false. How are we doing? So let's just kind of tuck that away. We're going to come back to that. And one of the values of just going through it is it starts to get your mind on what we're going to be focusing on and looking at and some of the issues that we'll be discussing. And then we are asked to say this prayer together. And as soon as I get done fussing with this, we're going to do it. So I'll be our leader. One of the reasons for this prayer is it just centers us in the way that we need to be centered to look at this data. In a sense, this data and our examination of it is all prayer. We're trying to get ourselves into a place where we can prayerfully discern what's happening in this congregation, how God is moving, and what kind of future God is calling us into. So it's appropriate that we begin with prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord, you are the God of all truth.
You know us through and through.
You reveal to us what we do not yet know.
You bring us out of darkness and into your wonderful light.
You invite us to return to the garden where we know and are known.
You offer us love that delivers us from fear and hiding.
You reconcile us to our loved ones.
You deliver us from blame and accusation.
You disclose to us the gifts and the depths of our souls.
You fill us with your Spirit and empower us for service.
You open our eyes to the brokenness that cripples our best intentions.
You pour oil into our wounds and carry us in your arms.
You show us the patterns that keep us bound to failure.
You open the bars of our captivity and set the prisoners free.
You are patient with our resistances to change.
Your judgment is always mixed with mercy.
When our minds cast a shell about our hearts,
your love melts a pathway to the depths of our beings.
open our minds and our hearts to the witness of our brothers and sisters.
Give us that love that casts out all fear.
Amen. So, again, before we plow ahead into the information and the data, a few remarks about what you're about to see. What CAT is about and what we are about at this point in your transition as a congregation, and in some sense we're always in transition, right? God's will for this planet has not been perfected and will not be in our lifetime. But at this particular point in the life at St. Andrew's, we need some help doing three things: making better decisions in less time and with more confidence. So we want to have some information and also a way of collecting that information so that we can make better decisions and that we can do that more efficiently in less time and have some confidence around those decisions. Okay? We want to be able to say, yeah, we made that decision consciously and with open minds and hearts. And it's a pastoral conversation. And so I think it might be tempting for some of us to get a little bit clinical and evaluative. And what I want to encourage is to have a pastoral conversation even as we crunch a lot of numbers. So we want to listen empathetically to this parish as opposed to analytically. So empathetically, that doesn't necessarily mean that my heart is bleeding for St. Andrew's or I'm feeling powerful emotions. What it means is I'm listening. So I don't know how many of you remember Frasier, the sitcom, right? He's but one caricature of my profession, therapist, right? And what does he say? I'm listening, right? So we want to listen empathetically to what we're seeing. The data that we have collected it's not impersonal, okay? So it's personal information about people. As they fill it out, most likely you were touching their hearts, you were opening their minds, you might have been irritating or upsetting them as you asked them various questions. And the responses that you got came from them and are about story, Okay? They're about personal stories. People don't think in numbers. If I say, how do you think St. Andrews is doing appealing and working with young people? People aren't going to think, I think we're a 3, right? But they might put 3, and what that little number means, it's a symbol for a story that is coming into their mind or their heart when you ask them the question. So it's not impersonal, the data that we're looking at. It is impartial, and that is to say that everybody gets to have a voice. And so all of their data is presented impartially, as opposed to a few squeaky wheels or some of the people who are more adept or able to make their voice heard. Everybody's voice is heard. And so we're using the symbols of numbers. So if I give you different numbers like 2020, what's that a symbol of?
Good vision.
Good vision. 120 over 80, what's that a symbol of? Blood pressure. 10-4, what's that a symbol of?
Okay, good buddy.
Okay, yeah, right? So numbers are symbols. And our task, and we're Christians, and so we're all about symbol. Cross, cup, plate, hand, tree, rock, river. We're good at symbols. And our job here is to look at the symbols that we're given by our beloved members and ask questions about what those symbols might be opening up. So it's not a report card as much as a collection of symbols that are grounded in story. So we're going to go through it in that stance from that beginning. This is a beginning of a conversation that you're going to have with St. Andrews, not the end. It's a place where you discern where you might need to talk more. There are a couple places as I looked at it where I thought, you know, that data could say a lot of different things. It could say that we're really bad at this thing, that people are scoring low, or it could say that we feel fine about it. And so there's just not a lot of energy around it. So we might have to ask them questions in follow-up. So we'll see that a lot. How many people know the set-aside prayer? Anybody? There's different forms of it, and it's not my favorite prayer, actually, because I don't like setting things aside very much, personally. But the set-aside prayer goes something like, God, help me to set aside everything I think I know about a situation or about myself or about you, so that I can be open to something new about this situation or about myself or about you. And so what we're trying to do here is to set aside everything we think we know about St. Andrews so that we can learn what we need to hear here. So I want to be open to questions as we go along, but I also want to encourage you, particularly since we're recording this, to see if we can save questions. So I'm going to make a promise to myself and to you that every half hour or so I'm going to ask if there are questions. And if you could jot them down, and we could practice some efficiency in that way, that'll help. There will be moments where you are relieved of the sound of my voice, and I'm relieved of having to use my voice, but just for the time being, let's take it easy on questions, but make sure that you write them down so that we can address them when we get to them. So, all right. So we are now ready to turn to page 4 in your packet. When you begin a conversation with someone, what might be something that you say? Anyone?
How are you?
How are you? Yeah. How you doing? How's it going? Right? And the CAT, the church assessment tool, is no different. In our beginning of a conversation with St. Andrews, they ask the question, how are you? And they ask that in 2 different ways. Overall satisfaction and overall energy. Okay? And so what you see here are 2 very important data points that are going to guide how we open the door on all of this data. Okay? overall satisfaction and overall energy. What Holy Cow has learned is that those two data points say a whole lot about the health and vitality of a congregation. The overall satisfaction of a place and the overall energy level. So sometimes the satisfaction is high, but the energy is low. An analogy would be, you have a really great car, but it's out of gas. Okay? Sometimes the energy level is high, but the satisfaction is low. So there's a lot of passion and energy about what you want to do, but a lot of frustration on the ground about getting it done. So I really want to get someplace, and I know exactly where I want to get, but my car is on the fritz. And I'm really upset with my car. Okay? So those two factors and how they intersect are going to say a lot about St. Andrews and how we're doing. And, I'm going to be repeating stuff that people who have taken statistics know about, people who have done instruments like this know about. So if you feel like your intelligence is being insulted, I'm sorry. And I would just only encourage you to help us out. So if I'm doing retread for some of you, just hang in there with me. Basically, what we're looking at here, roughly kind of over the course of the whole assessment, is clearly agree, on the fence, and clearly disagree. A lot of times, especially with church assessments, there's a lot of energy and interesting data in the fence responses. Okay? Most people who take these surveys, the overwhelming majority of people who take these surveys are not going to be really opposed to what's going on here or really upset. Most of those folks have voted with their feet, and they're not even taking the survey. And so you want to ask questions in your mind about fence sitters. What's keeping them on the fence? And so as you look at overall satisfaction at St. Andrews, let's smile, because what do we see? What do we see on overall satisfaction?
Very high.
Yeah. And here's what very high means. Very high in comparison to other churches. So there are benchmarks in place here on all of our data. So benchmarking is something that we always do. If you see a 2-year-old screaming and yelling and running through the room and causing destruction and disorder everywhere she goes, you don't get alarmed, right? Why don't you get alarmed? Why does that not upset you? Maybe it does. But why does it not, why do you not think this is a disordered human being?
Because she's 2.
Because she's 2. You have benchmarks. Or you see her running through the room and she's incredibly short, right? How tall is a 2-year-old? About 2 feet tall. You don't think that's a height compromised individual. Because you have a benchmark for what a child is supposed to be, roughly, right? She's not supposed to be 5'8", right? And so she's not. She fits her benchmark. And a lot of times parents will find out. They go to the doctor and they find out, how's my kid doing on height, weight, development of fine motor skills and so forth. So we benchmark all the time, right? We're doing it right now. And so on the benchmark, you guys are coming out very high. So clearly agree with overall satisfaction. On the whole, I'm satisfied with how things are in our church. Clearly agree, 74%. 22% on fence sitters. 3% clearly disagree. That's pretty good. Also, you don't have to go here unless you want to. But if you want to know a little bit more, this is going to bug me, this screensaver thing. You can go to page 26. You can put your thumb over on page 26. And that gives you some of the demographic data that underlies the general percentages. And it just lets you know who filled out your stuff and where they come from. And you don't have to worry about that, but that's for data heads among us who are just really curious about where these percentages came from and who it was who was filling this out. And I'm just going to take a moment I'm going to ask for your patience while I turn my screensaver off. It's to our own benefit. Because now I won't be cranky when that doesn't happen. There.
Does it say, oh,
Go ahead.
you start, supposed to
No.
be my question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Does it say how many total people took it?
Yeah, that's on page 4. So on the bottom of page 4, you'll see that the number of respondents was 165. And the percentage of average Sunday attendance of respondents to ASA is 67. Also, ASA, acronym alert, average Sunday attendance. Okay? So 165 is 67% of your average Sunday attendance. Ideally, you'd be at 80, but 67 is well within our ability to say that we are 95% certain that our data is plus or minus 5% accurate. So one of the things to keep in mind too is you don't need to have everyone respond in the same way that a doctor doesn't need all your blood to do a blood test, right? We just need enough blood to run our panels, right? And so 67% of ASA is just right in the zone. You're just great. For the overachiever churches among us, we want to hit 80, but we're not going to sweat that. Overall energy. Now this is, you'll notice that the data is reversed here because the question was asked negatively. So the questions were, it seems to me that we are just going through the motions of church activity, that would be low energy. Or there isn't much excitement about it among our members. So they were asked negatively. The reason is that we don't want people to go passive and just hit, extremely satisfied and stop thinking. We want to keep them on their toes as they take the instrument. And so you want your numbers to be reversed, and then look, they are. Very high energy level at St. Andrew's in comparison to other congregations. So right out of the gate, we've got some pretty encouraging data here. Satisfaction is high and energy level is high. When you look at the attendance trend, you see that you're kind of holding steady. Maybe a slight drop in attendance compared with 3 years ago, but it's in the margins. So it could be, plus or minus 5%. It could be that your attendance is very slightly up from where it was 3 years ago. What you may see over the next year is a little shrinking, which is typical for congregations who are between rectors. But generally, you're holding the line. And then another measurement here, value of activity beyond worship. On the whole, participation in church activities is very meaningful to me. This is activities outside of Holy Eucharist and the typical Sunday morning routine that folks are a part of. And again, you're pretty high. This is to say that you have ministries and activities here at St. Andrew's, apart from the Sunday morning liturgy, that have a lot of energy and satisfaction around them. That's a pretty good measurement of health. And then finally on the key indicators page, and this was really interesting for me, how this came out for you folks. The top 3 priorities, we're going to look at, I think, 17 priorities that were identified by the congregation, or by the respondents. The top 3 are listed here. These are priorities that you can think about and use as you come up with a profile for the rector search, and as you start to identify what is it that is most important to our folks here. And they are, create more opportunities for people to form meaningful relationships, develop and implement a comprehensive strategy to reach new people and incorporate them into the life of the church. We could talk a lot about what incorporation is like versus adding numbers. What does it mean to make them our body, part of our body? That's a deeper dimension of engagement. And then finally, expand outreach ministries that provide direct services to those on the margins of society. One thing that was interesting to me as I looked at this is that the top 3 priorities do not include youth and families, which is pretty typical. It's typical to have youth and families in the top 3. And my first interpretation of that is positive, that's up and running really strongly. Because a lot of times the top 3 priorities are going to be articulating dreams and hopes for your place. Okay? And so if that dream is already enacted, it may fall a little bit lower than the top 3. And we'll find that out as we go. I see a question there.
I think this one will help us as we go along,
Okay.
so I just wanted to ask
It's a
it now.
process question.
Right.
Uh-huh.
When we take a look at the ratings where we see a very high, and we see a high, what are the possible responses there? So we know what the range is.
So it goes all the way down to very low.
Mhm.
And I'll show you, I think the best way to answer your question is going to be coming right up. Yeah. It's going to it'll show you on a window graphic. Alrighty. Let's see. I just want to make sure we got it all. So one thing to think about is that because the people who have left St. Andrews did not take the survey, your numbers are a little bit inflated, and that's true for everybody. Okay? So you're missing a little bit of low satisfaction data. But in general, you can set your course by these numbers. Generally, your key indicators are really healthy. And you got a good response. All right. Let's talk about drivers. That's on page 5. If we had a question, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with the drinking fountains at St. Andrews? People would maybe answer it. They might look for the NA, right? Do you have drinking fountains at St. Andrews? Okay. Generally, drinking fountains are not awesome at churches, but they are not drivers of satisfaction and energy either, right? So at one of my beloved congregations in my history, there was a perpetually dead drinking fountain in the parish hall, and it said defunct on it, on a post-it note with a coffee stain, right? So a little bit pathetic. And drinking fountains are just not usually our forte. But you know what? Nobody really cares that much. It might upset them or rankle them, but it's not a driver of satisfaction or a driver of energy. And so there are no stupid questions, but there are questions that get us to what really drives satisfaction and energy, and we want to focus on what those questions might be. And so the areas that are drivers of satisfaction at St. Andrews are listed on page 5. You can see the 5 drivers. What this says is that these things are related to my satisfaction. If I'm responding to your survey, these factors are related to my satisfaction here more than other factors. These are not drinking fountain issues for me. Okay? Leaders showing a genuine concern when decisions need to be made. A healthy tolerance of differing opinions and beliefs. People who serve as leaders are representative of the membership. Our church provides opportunities to engage in active ministry within the church and to the world. Our rector helps us accomplish our mission by bringing out the best in everyone. These are important factors that drive satisfaction. So if you're putting a profile together, you're going to want to pay attention to some of these issues. You might want to ask people questions related to this. In a profile, I've talked about this with the smaller group leading the CAT. In a profile, you want to do 3 things. You want to say where you were, where you are, where you want to go, and what you want in a new rector. And so as you look at some of these drivers, you can start to think in those lines. What do we want in a new rector? The drivers are going to give you a lot of that data. Drivers of energy. There's 2 that came through in the data. Persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. That drives our energy. And then this one, which is an interesting one, and I'm going to pause here so that we really understand what's being said here. The same small group of people seem to make the most of the important decisions in our church. Now the word here that is interesting is the word same. And it has a negative connotation. The same people are making the decisions. The same people are running for vestry, or heading up a ministry team, or taking a group to New Orleans. That's another thing on my heart from St. Andrews, is I took a group to New Orleans, right? Same people are doing the same stuff. That's a driver of energy, good or bad. Okay? Now, on the right side, it says degree of focus. Do you see that? People might have questions about that. Basically, that's about clarity of the driver. There's a high degree of focus on the drivers of satisfaction. That is to say, your people are in touch with those drivers. They're in touch with how important those factors are in their satisfaction. And then a moderate degree of focus for the drivers of energy. So they are drivers of energy, but your people may or may not be in powerful relationship with that data. Does that make sense? So what that means is, I care about this. I don't necessarily know that I care about this. Okay? It's important to me, but I might not be entirely conscious of how important it is. Does that make a little bit of sense? Sometimes we are doing stuff in our life, or we're coming to church for a reason, and we don't always know what that reason is, or we sort of know, but we haven't really articulated it. Okay? So what I would say on drivers of energy is that, you know, your folks want your leaders to be representative of the membership, but they haven't necessarily articulated that desire to themselves. Your leaders want different folks to do leadership stuff, but they don't necessarily know that. They want it, and it's coming through in the data, but it might not be in their neocortex. It might not be conscious entirely. It's moderate, so it's not a real problem. It's just they're clear on what they want in a rector. That makes sense to them on a consciousness level. How am I doing? Is that coming through? Okay. And let's stop for a second if there are any comments or questions at this point.
So I have a
Nikki.
question. So these, I mean, the rankings is how our group vote, answer the survey.
Mhm.
But how does something become a driver satisfaction or not? How does it even show up on this list? Were there set items that are considered drivers of satisfaction, and then you rank from high to low on those items?
Yeah, so if there's energy around certain questions in the
Okay.
survey, it'll track in that way.
Okay.
Great.
So are the same questions grouped together are considered a driver? So the same questions
Yeah,
answered
so like,
together become persons who serve as leaders in our church or representative of the membership. Those questions,
yeah,
the
so
answers
like,
to those questions are considered as a cluster
yeah,
of this.
yeah. So if I'm taking your survey and I go through it, some of my responses are going to be, they're going to be linked to that driver.
Yes, okay.
And so that's going to pull out, whether I'm conscious of it or not, as the respondent, it's going to pull out that that's a driver for me,
Okay,
around energy or satisfaction.
and that's how that particular driver, persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. That's how that can be a high focus for drivers of satisfaction,
Yeah.
but a moderate focus for drivers of energy.
Right,
That's it, okay.
right. And what we're going to do too is we're going to look at this data again in different ways so that we can see how it colors some of the priorities as we go down the line that folks have, and like where they want St. Andrews to go. Any other questions before I start yakking again? Nikki?
Can I ask, this kind of goes back to the earlier question, discussion of the demographics. So You said that with the survey, questions are asked in opposite ways, so that somebody just doesn't go straight down and go,
Right.
yes, 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 yes to everything.
Right.
In terms of the methodology of the CAT, if somebody does do that, are those surveys thrown out or are they kept in?
So,
Where there's clearly, somebody's clearly done that. You understand what I'm asking?
yeah, I'm not sure if I know the
Okay,
answer.
I'm just curious.
Yeah. It may spoil the data, but it may just be one outlier.
It's a survey geek
Yeah,
question, so.
that's one of the two questions that people ask that I don't know the answer to. As I prepare for these events, I think there's going to be two questions I don't know the answer to. That's one of them. And I can also follow up on that, because I think, one thing I've heard pretty consistently here is a need for validity. You guys want to know that this is valid data. So that was what you just heard was a validity question. So I'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's consistent with our level of education when we look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to show up in a couple of places. Yeah.
That's huge.